Good morning, class. We are going to talk about social psychology today. Actually, I don't know if you're watching this in the morning. It's the morning that I'm recording this. At any rate, this is our final unit in AP psychology. It's social psychology. We're going to talk about all kinds of things in this video, which is part one. We're going to talk about attribution theory, attitudes, and persuasion. In later videos, we'll talk about all kinds of things, including sexism and racism, obedience and conformity. So we have a lot coming up in this unit. There are going to be 4 parts, so this is part 1. Let's check it out. Okay, as I said, this is what's in part 1. First, a little something about social thinking. What are social psychologists interested in? Here's a couple of examples. Does his absenteeism signify illness or laziness or a stressful school atmosphere, which would be a social setting? Was the horror of 9/11 the work of crazed, evil people or ordinary people corrupted by life events, which would be the social setting? So there's a lot of what's causing people to act a certain way. Is it their personality or is it the social setting? So we're thinking about others, especially when they engage in doing things that are unexpected. And what we find in social psychology is that a lot of times people are doing things that are unexpected because of social influence on them. So there's a guy named Fritz Heider. He came up with this idea called attribution theory. To attribute is to try to say what causes something. So he noticed that we have a tendency to explain people's behavior either by crediting the situation or the person's disposition. And disposition is just another word for personality. So for example, someone who stumbles down the stairs, you're at Bozeman High, they're walking down the hallway, or Gallatin High, and someone stumbles down the stairs. Is it because they were clumsy, or is it because somebody got in their way? So we attribute things for different reasons. Another example, a teacher notices that a kid has a lot of aggressive hostility. Is it because of his personality, or is it because of a reaction to stress or abuse at home? That's a real type of thing we worry about. Dispositions are enduring personality traits. So with this attribution theory, there's something called the fundamental attribution error. There's something we tend to do that's wrong, but we do it a lot, and lots of people do it. When we're analyzing other people, we overestimate the impact of personal disposition, and we underestimate the impact of situations. So when it's somebody else who stumbles down the stairs, we tend to think they're clumsy. It's their disposition. When it's us, we tend to think, oh, well, somebody got in my way. It was the situation. The stairs were slippery. So that is the fundamental attribution error, underestimating the impact of social situations on other people. So that matters because when you explain a person's behavior a certain way, it also affects how you react to that behavior. So here's an example. Someone's driving, the car cuts them off. They could attribute it to the situation. Maybe that driver's ill, and the reaction would be tolerance, proceeding with a caution, allowing the driver a wide berth. If you attribute it to the disposition, you would say that person's a crazy driver, and you would have an unfavorable reaction, which would be speeding up, racing past the other driver, giving them a dirty look. So that's why attribution matters, because it affects our behavior. Okay, there's a bunch of other concepts with attribution. I'm just going to go through them. You can pause the video if you need to write these definitions down. One is the self-serving bias. This is a tendency to attribute positive events in our own life to our own character, but when it's negative events, we attribute it to external factors. So you would say, I passed the test because I studied hard. I failed the test because the teacher was a jerk. So internal factors or external factors. False consensus effect. This is the tendency of people to, when you have a certain belief, maybe it's a political belief or maybe it's a sports team or something, you see your own behaviors and beliefs as being more common than they actually are. So I like Bernie Sanders or I like Donald Trump, and I think that more people like that same politician than is reality. The confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, and favor information in a way that confirms or strengthens our own prior personal beliefs. So, like, let's say you're doing a research paper for class and you think that something about World War I, or you're doing something about the Civil War or the progressive movement or the founding fathers, whatever it is, but you have a belief, and then when you go research it, all you do is look up information that confirms that belief. So you would think like something about Abraham Lincoln. He did a good job. He did a bad job. You would just search out information that confirms that. This happens again a lot with politics today. I like a certain party, so I only listen to podcasts that are favorable to that party. I only watch news that's favorable to that party. I only go to chat rooms, whatever, that favor that party. The last one here is the halo effect. This one's pretty cool. The tendency for a positive impression of a person, brand, or product in one area to positively influence your feelings in other areas about that company. So like if you really like your iPhone and you have a good impression about Apple because you have a Mac, and then Apple does something, like a few years ago they had this big privacy issue, this kind of fight with the government. So because you like their products, you see them in that fight and you have this positive view, and so you have a positive interpretation of their fight with the government. So that's called the halo effect. Okay, so that's about attitudes. Another thing that's interesting about attitudes is how do they change and how do they affect behavior? What is an attitude exactly? An attitude is a belief that predisposes a person to respond in a particular way to objects, other people, and events. If we believe a person is mean, we may feel a dislike for that person and act in an unfriendly manner. So your attitude often affects your actions. That's nothing new, right? However, attitudes don't always affect actions. Sometimes you can have an attitude, but you act differently because of the social situation. So for instance, when we went to war against Iraq in 2003, a lot of Democrats supported President Bush in the attack because there was public pressure on them. The American people were in favor of the war. So the Democratic leaders did not act on their attitudes. They caved to the public pressure. They had their own private reservations, but the social situation affected them. Another thing about attitudes is that actions can sometimes affect attitudes. So if you have cooperative actions, you're on a team, you play together, and your actions together shape your attitudes. Another time you see this is with like kids in high school. Let's say you do some volunteer work and you're just doing it to get your volunteer hours. You want to get into college. So you go help the elderly, or maybe you help some disabled people or the homeless people. You're not really into it, but then you go do it, and all of a sudden interacting with those people, helping them out, getting to know them, your attitude ends up changing because your actions led to the change. You see this attitude issue with cognitive dissonance. We already talked about cognitive dissonance this year, so we're bringing it back. If you have an attitude like this college student, the tuition is too high, but then she has a behavior in class, she has to debate. The school needs the money, like her teacher assigns her that position. And all of a sudden, she has cognitive dissonance. This is when two ideas are in your head, but they don't fit together. If one's right, the other has to be wrong. So you have this dissonance, and then you have to resolve the dissonance. And so she ends up changing her attitude. Maybe the school has a point. Okay, now we're going to talk about persuading people. So getting people to change their minds, getting people to change their attitudes. How do you do that? One model is called the elaboration likelihood model. And according to this model, there's two ways to persuade people. One is the central route, which is persuading people through thoughtful consideration of the merits of the information, like being rational, logical, weighing the issue, thinking about it clearly. The peripheral route to persuasion is when you get emotional cues about the issue, and there's superficial traits like appearance. And so you change your mind not because of the merits, but because of these more sort of superficial or emotional things. So, for instance, like if there's a real good advertisement and it's funny, or the people in it are cute, you can be affected by that. That's the peripheral route. Also, salesmen have a couple of techniques to persuade you, and you should know about these so you would know what they're doing. One is called the foot in the door phenomenon. This is when you get people to agree to a very small request, they're more likely to agree to a larger request later. So that's get your foot in the door, get people to agree to a smaller request, then they agree to a bigger one. Political parties do this when they're trying to get you to help their cause. First, they'll say like, "Hey, will you donate $5?" People are like, "Sure, I'll donate $5. It's not a big deal. I'll just click on this. We donate the money. It's pretty easy." And then after you do that, you get more emails, and they'll ask you to write a letter to the editor or put a sign in your yard or something else. There's also something called the door in the face phenomenon, and you can do this. This is one you can use with your parents if you want. This is when the persuader attempts to convince the respondent to comply by making a large request first. The large request gets rejected, then you ask for a smaller one, and they're more likely to do that. So it's like the door gets slammed in your face when you ask for the big thing. That's why it's called the door in the face. So this would be like, "Hey, Dad, I want to go to Lagoon with some friends next weekend." Your dad's like, "No way." And then you're like, "Okay, could I have $20 to go to a movie?" And your dad's like, "Sure." So that is called the door in the face. All right, that's the end of the first stress video. I hope it was good. You can ask me questions, email me if you have to.